An elderly woman is invited on a family trip, believing she would finally reconnect with her son and grandson. But it was all a cruel lie. She is abandoned on the side of a highway, with nothing but her wheelchair and a single suitcase. What no one expected was that from that abandonment a turnaround would emerge, capable of changing entire lives. If this story grabs you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Let's get into it. I promise this is the best story you'll hear all year. The sun beat down without mercy on that August Saturday in Dryden, a small town in the heart of West Texas. Inside the modest house on the outskirts of town, Eleanor Vance adjusted the silver brooch on the collar of her blue floral dress for the 10th time. Her trembling fingers, marked by age and the stroke that had taken her legs 3 years earlier, insisted on positioning the small piece of jewelry perfectly. It was all she had left of her husband, gone so long it sometimes felt like another lifetime. At 72, Eleanor's face bore the marks of someone who had known the relentless sun, the endless drought and the tireless struggle. But that morning her eyes shone with a light that hadn't been seen in years. Her daughter-in-law, Katie, had called on Thursday with an unexpected proposal. She said she wanted to take her mother-in-law to see a family cabin, a beautiful place with trees and shade, where she could spend the day and maybe even stay for a while. Maybe even with her grandson, little Leo, just 5 years old, whom she saw so rarely. Maybe even with her son, Joshua, who worked so much he barely had time to visit. Eleanor felt her heart tighten just thinking about it. It had been months since she'd hugged her little grandson, weeks since her son had stopped by. Always an excuse, always a commitment, always something more important. But now, she thought, fixing her grey hair in the cracked mirror, maybe things were changing. Maybe Katie had convinced Joshua that his mother deserved more attention. Maybe that cabin was the start of a new chapter, where she could finally be with the family she had raised with so much sacrifice. The wheelchair creaked as she settled into it, pushing herself into the living room. The suitcase had been packed since the night before. Inside, she had carefully arranged her blood pressure medication, the old documents she kept in a worn plastic folder, a change of clothes, and the rosary her mother had given her decades ago. She didn't know how long she'd be gone, but she wanted to be prepared. The car's sharp honk cut through the street's silence at 9 in the morning. Eleanor looked through the window and saw the silver sedan parked in front of the gate. Katie got out of the driver's seat wearing sunglasses, too big for her face, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just opened the gate and walked in, her heels clicking on the concrete with a determination that seemed odd for a relaxing outing. "Good morning, Eleanor," Katie said, her voice as cold as the air conditioning already blasting in the car. "Are you ready?" Eleanor smiled nervously. "I am, honey. Isn't Joshua coming?" "He'll meet us there," Katie replied without looking her mother-in-law in the eye. She grabbed the suitcase unceremoniously and walked out. "Let's go, it's a long drive." Eleanor's heart beat faster. She wanted to ask about her grandson, about the cabin, about how many days she'd be staying, but something in Katie's posture made her keep quiet. She pushed her wheelchair to the door, locked the house for the last time without knowing it would truly be the last, and allowed her daughter-in-law to help her into the back seat of the car. The wheelchair was folded and thrown into the trunk with more force than necessary. As the car left the dirt road and hit the highway, Eleanor looked out the window at the town she knew by heart. They passed the town square where she used to take little Joshua to play. They passed the church where she'd been married, still young and full of dreams. They passed the local grocery store where she did her weekly shopping. Every place was a memory, every corner a story. She felt a pang in her chest but pushed the bad thought away. "It's just a trip," she repeated to herself, "a trip to see the cabin." Katie drove in silence, her eyes fixed on the road. The radio was off, the air conditioning hummed quietly. Eleanor tried to start a conversation a few times. She asked about Leo, if he was doing well in preschool. She asked about the cabin, if it was far. She asked about Joshua, if he was working too much. The answers came back short, monosyllabic, sharp. "Is everything okay, honey?" Eleanor ventured after an hour on the road, her voice weak. "Everything's great, Eleanor," Katie answered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You'll see. Soon everything will be sorted out." What did she mean by that, Eleanor wondered, but she didn't have the courage to ask. She went back to looking out the window. The landscape was gradually changing. The houses grew farther apart, the vegetation drier, the road more deserted. There were no more signs for towns. There were no more other cars. Just the hot asphalt, the cloudless sky, and the heavy silence inside the sedan. Another hour passed. Then another. Eleanor's stomach started to rumble, but she didn't ask to stop. She felt thirsty, but she didn't complain. She just watched the increasingly arid landscape, her heart growing tighter and tighter. Where was this cabin anyway? Why was it so far? Why wasn't Katie saying anything? Suddenly, the car turned off the asphalt and onto a dirt road. Dust kicked up in thick clouds. The car shook over the potholes. Eleanor held onto the front seat, trying not to fall. Katie was driving too fast for this kind of road. She seemed to be in a hurry. She seemed to want to get somewhere fast. Or maybe, Eleanor thought with a shiver, she seemed to want to get rid of something. Finally, after another half hour on that seemingly endless dirt road, Katie stopped the car. There was nothing there, no cabin, no house, no fence, just the dry open country, a few low shrubs, a barbed wire fence in the distance, and the merciless midday sun. Katie turned off the engine. The silence was absolute. Eleanor felt the blood run cold in her veins. "We're here," Katie said, taking off her sunglasses. "Where's the cabin?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. Katie turned in her seat, facing her mother-in-law for the first time since they'd left Dryden. Her eyes were hard, cold, empty of any emotion other than contempt. "There is no cabin, Eleanor." The old woman's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean there's no cabin?" "You're a burden," Katie said with a terrifying calm. "For me, for Joshua, for everyone. We can't take it anymore. You eat, you take expensive medicine, you take up space. The house you live in is worth money. The disability check you get could be used for a lot of things, but you're just there, taking up everything, spending everything, keeping us from living our lives." Eleanor felt tears burn her eyes. "But I'm Joshua's mother. I raised him by myself. I worked my whole life to give him everything, and he's grateful, believe me," Katie continued, opening the car door. "So grateful he signed the power of attorney without even reading it, poor thing. He thought it was just to sort out some problems with Social Security. He has no idea that now the house is mine, the check is mine, everything is mine." Eleanor couldn't process what she was hearing. Power of attorney, house, check. This can't be happening, she thought. It's a nightmare. I'm going to wake up. But it wasn't a nightmare. It was real, horribly real. Katie got out of the car, opened the back door, pulled the wheelchair from the trunk, and quickly assembled it. Then, with surprising strength, she dragged Eleanor out of the car and put her in the chair. She grabbed the suitcase and threw it into the old woman's lap. "My medicine," Eleanor murmured, still in shock. "My papers." "It's all in there," Katie replied, getting back in the car. "You've got water in the suitcase too. That's more than a lot of people have." "You can't do this," Eleanor managed to say, her voice hoarse. "Joshua won't let you." "Joshua thinks you're in a private nursing home," Katie said, starting the engine, "and he'll keep thinking that until I decide to tell him the truth, if I ever do. But relax, Eleanor. Maybe someone will pass by. The desert's full of good people, right?" The cruel smile on Katie's face was the last thing Eleanor saw before the car reversed and disappeared in a cloud of dust. She was left there, paralyzed, watching the silver sedan become just a dot on the horizon and then vanish completely. The silence returned, a silence unlike any other Eleanor had ever experienced. It wasn't the peaceful silence of early morning, nor the comforting silence of a restful afternoon. It was an empty, heavy, desperate silence. The silence of someone completely alone in the middle of nowhere, with no direction, no hope, no one. She looked around. The dirt road stretched in both directions, disappearing into the horizon. There were no houses, no people, no shade, just the scorching midday sun, the cloudless blue sky, and the terrible certainty that she had been left to die. The first tears streamed hot down her wrinkled cheeks. They weren't tears of fear, not yet. They were tears of pain, of betrayal, of a disappointment so deep it felt like it was tearing something inside her chest. How was this possible? How could the son she had raised, nursed, and rocked to sleep on difficult nights allow this to happen? How could Katie be so cruel? How could the world be so unjust? But tears solved nothing. Eleanor wiped her face with the back of her hand. She needed to think. She needed to act. Staying put was a death sentence. She looked around again. To the right, the road seemed to get lost in an endless plain. To the left, on the horizon, was what looked like a utility pole. Where there's a pole, she thought there's a wire. Where there's a wire, there's a town, or at least a ranch. Determined, she pushed the wheels of her chair. The effort was immense. The dirt road was full of small rocks and ruts. Every few feet, the chair got stuck. Her arms, already frail with age, ached. The sun burned her exposed skin. Her mouth was starting to go dry. But she kept going. She pushed, stopped to breathe, pushed again. Foot by foot, inch by inch. Half an hour passed, maybe an hour. Time seemed to have lost all meaning under that sun. Eleanor felt her head throb. Her vision started to blur. The thirst was agony. She remembered the bottle of water Katie had said was in the suitcase. With trembling fingers, she opened the zipper. There it was, a small bottle of mineral water. She drank slowly, controlling herself not to finish it all at once. She had to make it last. She didn't know how much longer she had. The pole was closer now. She could see it was definitely a utility pole, and farther on, there were others. That meant civilization wasn't that far away, but how far? A mile? 5? 10? It didn't matter. She would keep going. She had no choice. But the human body has its limits, and the body of a 72-year-old woman, weakened by a stroke, dehydrated, and under extreme stress, has even smaller limits. When Eleanor finally reached the shade of the first pole, she felt she couldn't go any farther. She stopped there, rested her head against the concrete base, closed her eyes. Memories came in waves. She saw herself as a young woman working the fields with her parents. She saw herself pregnant with Joshua, alone after the boy's father had run off. She saw herself raising her son with what little she had, selling pies at the county fair, doing laundry for others, never letting him go hungry. She saw Joshua growing up, studying, getting a job. She saw the pride in his eyes when he bought his first house. Where did it all go wrong, she thought? Where did I lose my son? A noise in the distance made her open her eyes. It was the rumble of an engine. A truck? A car? She didn't know. She just knew it was her chance. Maybe her only one. She tried to yell, but her voice wouldn't come out. Her throat was too dry. She tried to wave, but her arms wouldn't obey. She just sat there, looking down the road, praying that whoever it was would stop. "Please, God," she murmured. "Please." The old pickup truck, its red paint peeling and its bed full of produce crates, slowed down. The driver, a man in his 50s with a faded cap and a plaid shirt, frowned when he saw the unlikely figure in the shade of the pole. An old lady in a wheelchair in the middle of nowhere, all alone, all. This wasn't right. He hit the brakes. The truck stopped with a screech. He jumped out and ran to Eleanor. "Ma'am, what on earth are you doing out here?" he asked, his voice thick with concern. Eleanor tried to speak, but only managed a weak groan. The man saw the empty water bottle in her suitcase and understood. He ran back to his truck, returned with another bottle of water. He helped the old woman drink slowly. "Easy now. Easy. Take it slow. That's it. A little more. There you go." Gradually, Eleanor managed to get her voice back. Between sobs, she told him what had happened. The man listened in silence, his jaw tight, his eyes filled with contained anger. "That's just awful," he muttered when she finished. "Just plain awful. But you're going to be okay, you hear me? I'm taking you to town. There's a boarding house there, the owner's a good woman, she'll help." His name was Gus, the truck driver. He delivered fruits and vegetables to the small towns in the region. He was a simple man, of few words, but a big heart. He helped Eleanor into the passenger seat with extreme care, folded the wheelchair and put it in the back. He drove slowly, avoiding the potholes, talking softly to calm the old woman who was still trembling. The town was called Marfa, on the other side of the river. It wasn't big, but it was alive. People on the streets, shops open, a sense of movement. Gus parked the truck in front of a single-story house, painted a pale yellow, with a sign out front that read, Nancy's Boarding House. He got out, knocked on the door. A woman in her 60s with short hair and a wide smile answered. "Nancy, I need your help," Gus said. "It's urgent." When Nancy saw Eleanor in the truck's cab, the old woman's face marked by the sun and suffering, she understood that this was someone who needed more than help. She needed humanity. "Bring her inside," she said without hesitation. "I have a room free." And so, on that hot August afternoon, Eleanor Vance found, in the arms of strangers, more love and compassion than she had received from her own family in years. She was settled into a simple but clean room, with a soft bed and white lace curtains. Nancy brought her soup, juice, and clean towels. She treated her sunburned skin with ointment. She spoke softly, calming her wounded heart. That night, when Eleanor finally slept after hours of crying and despair, she dreamed of the past. She dreamed of her dead husband, who came to her and said everything would be all right. She dreamed of her mother, gone for decades, who hugged her and wiped away her tears. She dreamed of Joshua as a child, running through the fields with a pure, innocent smile, before the world turned him into someone she no longer recognized. When she woke the next day, it took a few seconds to remember where she was. The sun was streaming gently through the window. There was the smell of fresh coffee coming from the kitchen. And for the first time in many, many years, Eleanor felt something she had forgotten was possible. She felt that maybe, just maybe, there was still a reason to go on. The first few days at Nancy's boarding house were like a slow, careful awakening. Eleanor would wake up startled in the middle of the night, her heart racing, thinking she was still on that deserted road under the merciless sun. But then she would hear the sounds of the house, the birds singing in the backyard, the clatter of pans in the kitchen, and remember that she was safe. She was alive. She was, for the first time in a long time, in a place where someone cared. Nancy Peterson had been a widow for 15 years. She had turned the large house her husband left her into a modest but welcoming boarding house. It wasn't for the money, which barely covered the bills. It was for the company, for the feeling of having life around her, voices, stories, humanity. When Gus showed up that afternoon with Eleanor, Nancy felt in her heart that this woman was no ordinary guest. She was someone fate had placed in her path for a reason. "You can stay as long as you need," Nancy had said that first night, sitting on the edge of the bed as Eleanor slowly ate her soup. "Don't you worry about payment right now. We'll figure that out when you're feeling better." Eleanor wanted to protest, to say she couldn't accept charity, but the words died in her throat. She had no money, no home, nothing but the suitcase with a few belongings. She accepted, and in that acceptance there was a surrender. Not a surrender to defeat, but to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was still kindness in the world. The routine of the boarding house was simple and comforting. Nancy woke up early, made strong coffee and biscuits. There were 2 other boarders besides Eleanor. One was Wayne, a mechanic in his mid-30s who had been renting the back room for 2 years. A quiet man of few words but with a huge heart. He worked at a nearby garage and was saving up to open his own shop. The other was Matt, a trucker's assistant in his early 20s, who stayed at the boarding house between trips. A cheerful, playful guy, always with a funny story to tell. When Nancy explained Eleanor's situation to them, their reaction was immediate. Wayne built a ramp at the entrance of the house to make it easier for the wheelchair. Matt helped adapt the bathroom, installing grab bars he got from an acquaintance. They didn't make a fuss, they didn't expect thanks, they just did it because it was the right thing to do. Eleanor cried when she saw the modifications. Not from sadness, but from something she hadn't felt in so long, she struggled to recognize it. Gratitude. Pure and simple gratitude. As the days went by, she began to integrate into the life of the boarding house. She helped Nancy peel vegetables in the kitchen. She mended the guy's torn clothes. She told stories of the old days in the desert when everything was harder but somehow more human. In the evenings, they all gathered in the living room to watch the soaps. Nancy made popcorn, Wayne brought soda, Matt came up, with wild theories about what would happen to the characters, and Eleanor laughed. A real, light-hearted laugh, the kind she hadn't had in years. But the nights were still difficult. Lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling, Eleanor thought of Joshua. Did he know what had happened? Did he miss her? Did he care? The pain of betrayal was still fresh, throbbing like an open wound. She had raised that boy alone, given up everything so he could get an education, have opportunities, be someone in life. And in the end, he had abandoned her, or worse, allowed her to be abandoned. The anger came in waves. It wasn't just at Katie, though her daughter-in-law was the architect of the cruel plan. It was at Joshua, too, because even if he had been deceived, how does a son not notice his mother is gone? How does he not get suspicious when his wife says the old woman is in a nursing home? How does he not visit, not call, not check? But along with the anger came a deep sadness. Eleanor knew she had lost her son long before that abandonment on the road. She had lost him gradually, over the years as he grew distant, as his visits became rarer, as Katie took more and more control over his life. How had she not seen the signs? How had she been so blind? One afternoon, 3 weeks after arriving at the boarding house, Eleanor was organizing her things in the wardrobe when an old plastic folder fell out of her suitcase. It was one of those clear folders that had once been colored but had faded with time. Inside were old, yellow documents, some almost crumbling at the edges. Eleanor picked up the folder carefully. She had almost forgotten about these papers. They were documents belonging to her father, Otis Vance, who had died when she was only 22. A tough, hard-working man who had spent his entire life trying to make a living off a piece of land he had inherited from his grandfather. Dry land, unforgiving land, land that yielded nothing but cacti and rocks. He had died young, consumed by work and frustration. He had left that land to Eleanor, his only child, as her inheritance. She had kept the papers for decades, more for sentimental reasons than because she believed they had any value. After all, who would want that patch of dirt in the middle of nowhere? But now, looking at those documents closely for the first time in years, Eleanor saw something she didn't remember. The land was located in the Coyote Ridge area, a region that in recent years had become the target of eco-tourism projects. Did that land still exist? Was it still hers? She decided to show the documents to Nancy. "Well, look at this," Nancy said, examining the papers carefully. "This looks like a deed. And look, it's still registered. You never tried to sell it?" Eleanor shook her head. "I didn't even know if it was worth anything. It's dry land in the middle of nowhere. Who would want it?" Nancy thought for a moment. She knew a young man, Brian, the nephew of a friend, who was finishing law school in Odessa. A serious, honest kid who did some pro bono work to help people in need. Maybe he could take a look, see if those papers had any value, if there was any chance Eleanor could get some income from it. Brian Fisher was 26, with perpetually messy curly hair, and an unshakable belief that the law existed to serve the most vulnerable. He came from a simple family, had paid for college by working as an office clerk during the day and studying at night. Now, about to graduate, he dreamed of opening a community law office that would charge those who could pay to serve those who couldn't for free. When Nancy called and told him Eleanor's story, Brian was outraged. How could such cruelty be possible? He decided right then and there that he would help. 2 days later, on a Saturday morning, he showed up at the boarding house with a briefcase and an old laptop. "Mrs. Vance, it's a pleasure to meet you," he said, shaking the old woman's frail hand with respect. "Let's see what we can do." He spent hours examining the documents, doing research online, calling county clerk offices. Eleanor watched him anxiously, not quite understanding what he was looking for. Nancy served coffee and cookies, also curious. Wayne and Matt showed up during lunch, learned what was happening, and joined the group in the living room. It was mid-afternoon when Brian looked up from his computer screen, his face pale, his expression one of disbelief. "Mrs. Vance, do you know exactly where this land is?" Eleanor described it as best she could remember. A hilly region near the old settlement of Sitio del Moco, an area that in her father's time was considered worthless. Brian turned the laptop towards her. On the screen was a map of the region, and a newspaper article from 6 months ago announcing a major eco-resort and luxury housing development project at Coyote Ridge. The construction company responsible was paying top dollar for land in the area to make the project viable. "Your land," Brian said slowly, as if he could barely believe what he was saying, "is right in the middle of the area they want to develop, and according to these documents, the title is still legally yours. You never sold it, never transferred it. This is worth a lot of money, Mrs. Vance, a whole lot of money." The silence that followed was thick. Eleanor stared at the computer, not fully comprehending. Nancy put a hand to her mouth. Wayne and Matt looked at each other, dumbfounded. "How much?" Eleanor managed to ask, her voice trembling. Brian did some calculations, consulted a few websites, and called a colleague who worked in real estate law. When he hung up, his eyes were shining. "If we can prove the title and sell to this developer, you could get between $2 and $3 million. The room spun. Eleanor felt like she was going to faint. Nancy rushed to her with a glass of water. The guys came closer, concerned, but the old woman was fine. She was just in shock, deep shock. "Millions?" she repeated, as if the word made no sense. $1 million? Brian nodded seriously. "But there's a road ahead of us, Mrs. Vance, we need to track. Down supplementary documents, update the registration, prove that you are the rightful owner. And we need to do it fast, before someone tries to contest it or the developer buys up neighboring plots and isolates yours. I can handle all of it if you authorize me." Eleanor looked him in the eye. She saw a sincere, honest young man who wanted to help. But she also saw something more. She saw the opportunity that God, or fate, or chance, was placing in her hands. The opportunity not just to survive, but to turn this tragedy into something bigger, something meaningful. "You can handle it," she said with a firmness that surprised even herself. "But I want to do this right. I want everything to be legal, honest. I don't want to steal from anyone. If this land is mine, we prove it. If it's not, we give up." Brian smiled. "You'll see, Mrs. Vance. Justice will prevail. This time it will." The following months were a flurry of activity. Brian worked tirelessly, gathering documents, talking to old county clerks, finding witnesses who knew Otis Vance and could attest to his ownership of the land. He went to the region, photographed the property, mapped out its boundaries. He discovered that, indeed, the developer was desperate to acquire that specific lot, as it was strategically located for the project. Meanwhile, at the boarding house, life went on. But now there was hope in the air, an expectation. Eleanor began to daydream. If this worked out, if she really managed to sell that land, what would she do with the money? She talked with Nancy on hot afternoons as they sewed on the porch. And it was in these conversations that a purpose began to form. Eleanor didn't want the money for herself. She didn't need it. At 72, what would she do with millions? Travel, buy things? None of it made sense. What made sense was to use this blessing to help others who were in the same situation she had been in. Other abandoned elderly people, other people discarded by their own families. "I want to build a home," she said one afternoon to Nancy. "A place where abandoned seniors can live with dignity, with respect, with care. A place where no one is treated like a burden." Nancy had tears in her eyes. "And I want to help you do it, Eleanor. We'll do it together." It was at the end of the 4th month on a June afternoon that Brian called. His voice was vibrant with emotion. "Mrs. Vance, we did it. The title has been recognized. The land is legally yours, and the developer has already made an official offer, $2.5 million. They want to close the deal soon." Eleanor took a deep breath. "You can accept it," she said. "Close the deal." 3 weeks later, the money was deposited into an account Brian had helped her open. Eleanor looked at the balance on the ATM screen and could hardly believe it. There it was, that huge number, that amount that would transform not only her life, but the lives of so many others. The first thing she did was pay Brian. The young man tried to refuse, saying he would do it for free, but Eleanor insisted. "You have a gift, son," she said, "and that gift needs to be rewarded so you can continue helping others." She paid him the equivalent of 2 years' salary for a young lawyer, enough money for him to open his community law office and realize his dream. Next, she called Gus. The truck driver who had saved her was in the middle of a trip, but when he returned and Nancy told him Eleanor wanted to see him, he showed up at the boarding house the same day. The old woman was on the porch, waiting. "Gus, you saved my life," she said bluntly. "If it weren't for you, I would have died on that road. So I want to give you something." She handed him an envelope. Inside was the money for a new truck. Gus tried to refuse, saying he did what anyone would have done, but Eleanor was firm. "It's not charity, it's justice. You deserve to have a good truck, one that doesn't break down all the time, that doesn't give you so much trouble. Please accept it." The big, strong man, accustomed to the harshness of the desert, cried like a child. He accepted the gift with the humility of someone who knows how to recognize a blessing. For Nancy, Eleanor had a special conversation one Sunday morning. They sat in the kitchen, just the two of them, with fresh coffee and cornbread. "Nancy, you opened your home to me when I had nothing. You gave me shelter, food, affection. You treated me like family. That's why I want this boarding house to be truly yours. I'm going to buy this property for you. No debts, no mortgage payments. It will be yours." Nancy cried so hard, Eleanor thought she might get sick, but they were tears of happiness, of gratitude, of relief. The boarding house was rented, and Nancy lived on a razor's edge, always afraid of not being able to make rent, of losing everything she had built. Now she was free. She was the master of her own destiny. Wayne and Matt were also remembered. For the mechanic, Eleanor gave the money to open his own garage. For the trucker's assistant, she paid for a technical course in logistics that the young man had always dreamed of taking. Neither of them expected anything. Neither had helped with any thought of reward, but Eleanor wanted them to know that their kindness had not been forgotten. With all that done, there was still a lot of money left, and Eleanor had plans, big plans. But she knew that before she could put them into action, there was a score to settle, a confrontation that was inevitable. Because somewhere in Dryden, Joshua and Katie were living their lives, believing they had gotten rid of the burden, living in the house that was hers, spending the disability check that was hers, convinced they would never be held accountable, but they were wrong. Eleanor Vance, the woman they had left to die, was alive. She was strong, and she was ready to face them, not for revenge, though the anger still burned in her chest, but for justice, and for all the other people who, like her, had been discarded, forgotten, treated as if they had no value. It was time to show that every life has value, that every person deserves dignity, and that actions have consequences. They always do. In Dryden, Joshua Miller's life continued its seemingly calm course. He woke up early, went to work at the construction supply company where he was a manager, and came home in the late afternoon. Katie took care of Leo, managed the house, did the shopping. Everything seemed to be in order. Everything seemed fine. But beneath the calm surface there was a tension that Joshua pretended not to notice. His mother had been in the nursing home for 6 months. At least that's what Katie said. A private facility with good care where she was being well looked after. Joshua had never visited. Katie always had an excuse. "The home is far away. Your mom is still adjusting. It's better not to disturb her now." She asked for some time, and Joshua, tired of the arguments, accepted the excuses. Deep down, a part of him was even relieved. He no longer had to worry about his mother. He no longer had to deal with the guilt of seeing her waste away in that modest house. Someone was taking care of her. That was enough. Or at least that's what he told himself on the nights when remorse came to visit. It was on a Monday in February that everything began to change. Joshua was in his office when he received a call from an unknown number. A polite male voice introduced himself as a representative of the Horizon Ridge Development Corporation. He was asking about a piece of land in the Coyote Ridge area that, according to their records, belonged to the Vance family. Joshua frowned. Land? What land? He didn't know about any land. The man explained that it was an old property registered in the name of Otis Vance, which had then passed to Eleanor Vance. They were trying to locate the heirs because they were interested in acquiring the area. Otis was the grandfather Joshua had barely known. Eleanor, his mother, a family property. Joshua felt his heart race. Could it be worth something? The man hesitated. Well, Mr. Miller, we've already negotiated with the current owner. We're just calling to confirm some details from the probate records. The sale has already been finalized. Current owner? What owner? His mother was in a nursing home. How could she have sold anything? Joshua asked for more details. The man, sensing the confusion, was cautious. He explained that Eleanor Vance had personally signed all the documentation 3 months ago, assisted by a lawyer. The sale had been finalized for $2.5 million. Joshua almost dropped the phone. $2.5 million. Impossible. His mother didn't own any land. His mother had no money. His mother was in a nursing home, incapable of making decisions. There had to be a mistake. Some kind of scam. Someone was impersonating his mother. He needed to call the police, cancel this fraudulent sale. He hung up and immediately called Katie. His wife was at home, her voice too calm for the bomb that was about to explode. Katie, I just got a call about some land. They said my mom sold it for millions. This is crazy, right? Someone's running a scam using her name. On the other end of the line, there was a silence, long, heavy. When Katie finally spoke, her voice was different, tense. Joshua, we need to talk. Come home now. The drive home was a blur. Joshua drove on autopilot, his mind racing in circles. When he walked into the house, Katie was in the living room, sitting on the sofa, her arms crossed. Leo was at his other grandmother's house, having left school early. Sit down, she said. This is serious. Joshua sat. And then Katie began to talk. But not the whole truth. Never the whole truth. She said his mother did have an old piece of land, an inheritance from her father, that had never been worth anything. But in recent months, with the developer's project, the value had skyrocketed. She said she had heard about it by chance from an acquaintance who worked at the city hall. She said she had tried to tell Joshua, but he was always too busy to talk about his mother. And? Joshua asked impatiently. What happened? Katie bit her lip. She sold it. Your mother sold the land for millions, and she didn't share it with us, Joshua. She didn't offer us anything, even though we took care of her, even though this house was hers and we're maintaining everything. Joshua shook his head, confused. But how? She's in a nursing home. How did she sell? How did she sign? That's when Katie offered the second version of the story. She said his mother wasn't in a nursing home at all, that she had run away, left the house on her own, months ago, that she must be hiding somewhere, planning to keep all the money for herself. She said she had tried to find her, had called hospitals, police stations, but with no luck. And now, finding out about the sale, it was clear that the old woman had always been clever, had always known about the land, had always planned to scam her own family. Joshua listened to all of this and felt that something didn't add up. His mother running away, his mother pulling a scam. It didn't make sense. Eleanor could barely read and write. How could she orchestrate something like this? Katie, where is my mother, really? His wife looked away. I already told you, she left. She walked out of the house and disappeared. But look, Joshua, we're entitled to a piece of that money. You're her son. We deserve it. Joshua stood up from the sofa. Something was very wrong indeed. He needed answers, real answers. He spent the next few days investigating. He called Brian, whose contact information he got from the developer. The young lawyer was cautious but confirmed that Eleanor was alive, lucid, and had legally sold the land. He also confirmed that she was living in Marfa, in a boarding house. He didn't give the address, but Joshua was persistent. With a few calls, a few contacts, he found the name of Nancy's boarding house. When he told Katie he had found his mother, his wife's reaction was strange. She turned pale, nervous. She said it wasn't a good idea to go. There, that they should send a lawyer, that Eleanor might be dangerous, unstable. Dangerous, my mother? Joshua was starting to get suspicious. "Katie, what did you do?" "Nothing," she replied too quickly. "I didn't do anything. I'm just worried about you, about us." But Joshua didn't believe her. The following Saturday, without telling his wife, he got in his car and drove to Marfa. Katie found out and followed him. She couldn't let her husband get there first. She couldn't let him hear his mother's version of the story before she could set the stage. She had to arrive with him, control the narrative, keep the lies standing. Nancy's boarding house was quiet that Saturday morning when Joshua's car pulled up. He got out slowly, his heart pounding. He went to the door and knocked. Nancy answered, suspicious when she saw the well-dressed man with a tense posture. "Good morning. I'm looking for Mrs. Eleanor Vance." Nancy narrowed her eyes. "And who are you?" "I'm her son, Joshua." Nancy's expression changed, from suspicion to something between anger and contempt. The son, the one who had allowed all of this to happen. She was about to slam the door in his face when Eleanor appeared in the hallway in her wheelchair. "It's all right, Nancy, I'll talk to him." His mother's voice sent a chill down Joshua's spine. How long had it been since he'd heard it? 6 months? 7? And now there she was, thinner, older, but strangely stronger too. The eyes that stared at him no longer had that sweet submissiveness of before. They had firmness, they had pain, they had disappointment. "Mum," Joshua began, but he didn't know how to continue. "Come in," Eleanor said. "I think we have a lot to talk about." That's when Katie arrived. She saw her husband's car and rushed into the boarding house. And when her eyes met Eleanor's for the first time in months, she knew that all was lost. "Katie," Eleanor said with a terrifying calm, "I'm glad you came too. It makes things easier." The 4 of them gathered in the boarding house living room. Nancy stayed nearby with Wayne and Matt. Brian also showed up, having been warned by Eleanor that this day would come. The tension was palpable. Joshua sat in a chair, looking at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. "Mum, what's going on? They told me you sold some land. They told me you disappeared from home. I don't understand any of this." Eleanor took a deep breath. "Then I'll explain it to you, son. I'll tell you exactly what happened." And she told him everything. From Katie's call promising a trip to the cabin, the long drive, the stop in the middle of nowhere, the abandonment, the certainty that she was going to die there, Gus's rescue, the welcome at the boarding house, the discovery of the land, the sale, everything. Joshua turned pale. He shook his head, refusing to believe it. No, that can't be true. Katie wouldn't do that. Eleanor handed him documents, photos Nancy had taken of her sunburns when she arrived, a statement from Gus, medical records from the local clinic, everything corroborating her story. "Lies!" Katie shouted, standing up. "She's making all of this up. She disappeared on her own. She's trying to hurt us." But Joshua looked at the documents, looked at his mother, looked at his wife, and for the first time in years, he really looked. He saw the woman who had raised him alone, who had sacrificed everything for him, who had never lied in her entire life. He saw the wife who had always been controlling, manipulative, who always wanted more, always demanded more. And he understood. He finally understood. "Katie," he said slowly, "what did you do?" "Nothing," she repeated, but her voice was failing. "I didn't do anything." "You had me sign a power of attorney," Eleanor continued. "You made me sign it, saying it was for Social Security. You transferred my house to your name, my disability check, everything. And then you took me to that road and you left me. You left me there to die. Lies!" "And you, Joshua," Eleanor said, looking at her son. "You signed papers without reading them. You believed everything she said without question. You didn't come to see me once in 6 months. Not once. Not one call. Not one text. Nothing." Tears began to stream down Joshua's face. "Mom, I didn't know. She said you were fine. She said you were in a good nursing home." "I believed her." "You wanted to believe her," Eleanor corrected with a hardness he had never heard in her voice. Because it was easier. Because that way you didn't have to be bothered. You didn't have to deal with an old, sick, dependent mother. It was easier to believe the lie. Joshua broke down. He cried like he hadn't cried since he was a child. "Mom, forgive me, please. I was weak. I was an idiot. But I love you. I've always loved you." Eleanor felt her heart ache. She wanted to hug her son. She wanted to say everything was okay. But it wasn't. It wasn't okay. And if she did that, she would be saying that the abandonment was acceptable, that the neglect was forgivable, and it wasn't. Love doesn't justify everything, Joshua, she said. Love needs action, presence, respect, and you haven't given me that in a very long time. Katie, seeing that the situation was lost, tried one last gambit. She's rich now, that's why. She wants the money all for herself. She was always greedy. Brian stood up. "Mrs. Miller, I suggest you stop. I have documents here proving the fraudulent transfer of assets. I have witnesses to the abandonment. I have everything I need to press criminal charges against you. The only reason Mrs. Vance hasn't done so yet is because she wanted to give her son the chance to know the truth first." Katie looked around. She was cornered. She tried to run, but Wayne and Matt blocked the door, not threateningly, just firmly. "Sit down, Katie," Eleanor ordered. "We're not done yet." What followed were hours of confrontation. Katie tried to maintain her lies, but one by one they were dismantled. She tried to blame Joshua, but he now saw clearly how he had been manipulated. She tried to threaten, but she had no ground to stand on. In the end, only the raw, naked truth remained. She had planned everything. She wanted Eleanor's assets. She wanted to get rid of the mother-in-law she considered a burden, and she had almost succeeded. Joshua asked for a divorce right there, in front of everyone. Katie left the boarding house screaming, promising revenge, saying she would take Leo away. But Joshua was determined. He had wasted too much time. He had failed his mother. He would not fail again. When they were alone, mother and son, the silence was heavy. Joshua knelt in front of the wheelchair. "Mom, I know I have no right to ask for anything, but please let me try again. Let me be the son I should have always been." Eleanor touched her son's face. She saw in him the boy he had been, the good, loving boy, before the world and the wrong relationships had changed him. Was there a chance to get that boy back? Was it too late? "I don't know if I can forgive you right now, Joshua," she said honestly. "The wound is too deep, but maybe with time we can rebuild something. If you really change, if you prove with actions, not words, that you are sincere." Joshua nodded, crying. "I'll prove it, Mom, every day. For the rest of my life I will prove it." Eleanor hugged him, and in that hug there was pain, there was partial forgiveness, there was cautious hope. But there was also the certainty that she was no longer the submissive woman who accepted anything. She was a woman who knew her worth, and who would never, ever allow herself to be treated as disposable again. The months following the confrontation were a time of profound transformation for everyone involved. Joshua returned to Dryden, but no longer as the man he had been. He filed for divorce, which Katie contested fiercely, but unsuccessfully. The evidence of fraud and abandonment was too solid. He won shared custody of little Leo, and for the first time in years, he began to be a truly present father. Every weekend, Joshua made the trip to Marfa. He brought Leo, who gradually got to know the grandmother he barely knew existed. The first visits were tense, awkward. Eleanor didn't know how to act around her grandson, and the boy was confused by everything happening in his life. But with patience, with time, with genuine love, the bridge began to be rebuilt. Eleanor bought children's storybooks and spent hours reading to her grandson. Nancy baked special cakes on visiting days. Wayne took the boy to see the cars at his garage. Matt taught Leo how to play dominoes. And slowly, that little 5-year-old boy began to smile for real, to run through the boarding house, to call Eleanor grandma with the affection a child only shows when they feel safe. Joshua watched all of this with a divided heart. Happy to see his son happy, to see his mother reborn, but deeply ashamed of the lost time, of the wrong choices, of the blindness that had almost cost the life of the person who loved him most in the world. One Sunday afternoon, while Leo played in the backyard with Nancy's chickens, Joshua sat next to his mother on the porch. "Mom," he began, his voice hesitant, "I keep thinking about what could have been different. If I had paid attention, if I had visited you, if I hadn't been so blind." Eleanor looked at her son, saw the worry lines that weren't there before, the white hairs starting to appear. "Joshua, you can't change the past. We can only change what's ahead. But I need you to know," he continued, "that not a day goes by that I don't think about what I did, what I failed to do. And I promise, Mum, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it." Eleanor placed her hand on his. "You don't have to make it up to me, Joshua. You just need to live differently, be different. And you are, I see it in the way you look at Leo, in the way you talk to him, in the way you're here, every single weekend, without fail. That's more than words, that's action." Joshua hugged his mother, and in that hug there was pain, there was forgiveness being slowly built, there was hope that maybe, one day, the wound would fully heal. While the family relationship slowly mended, Eleanor put her plans into action. With the help of Brian and Nancy, she began looking for a suitable property for the senior home she dreamed of creating. She wanted a large, airy place with a yard where abandoned people could not just survive, but live with dignity. They found an old decommissioned inn on the outskirts of Marfa. It had 10 rooms, a large living room, a spacious kitchen, and a yard with fruit trees. It had been abandoned for years and needed renovations, but it had potential. Eleanor bought the place and hired a crew for the work. The renovation took 4 months. Eleanor oversaw every detail. She wanted the rooms to be cozy, not institutional. Each one painted a different color, with light fabric curtains, comfortable beds, and a small personal wardrobe. She wanted the living room to be a place for community, not loneliness. She put in soft sofas, a large television, and shelves with books and games. She wanted everything to convey the message that these people were not there out of charity, but by right. The right to live well. The right to be respected. The right to not be discarded. The kitchen was updated with modern equipment, but kept a homey feel. Nancy helped plan each space, thinking about functionality but also comfort. The yard was transformed into a garden, with benches under the shade of the trees, a small orchard, and even a vegetable patch where future residents could plant if they wished. She named the place the Otis House, in honor of the father who never knew the value of the land he had left behind, the land that now allowed so many lives to be transformed. She had a carved wooden sign made with the name, which was placed at the entrance. Underneath, a phrase that summed it all up. Here, everyone has value. When the Otis House was inaugurated on a sunny November morning, there were tears of joy. Eleanor was at the entrance in her wheelchair, welcoming the first residents. There were 6 seniors, all with stories of abandonment, all marked by family rejection. Each was greeted with a hug, with respect, with the promise that things would be different here. The first to arrive was Mr. Raymond, 81, who had been living for months in an overcrowded public shelter after his only daughter kicked him out of her house. He had diabetes and vision problems, but a smile that lit up his wrinkled face. When he saw the room that would be his, with a window overlooking the orchard, he sat on the bed and cried. It had been so long since he'd had a space of his own. Next came Mrs. Geraldine, 77, a former elementary school teacher who had been put in a nursing home by her nephew, who was after her pension. She had early-stage Alzheimer's but was still lucid most of the time. She brought with her only a small suitcase and a box of old photographs. Eleanor greeted her with a long hug, and Geraldine murmured, her voice trembling, "It's been so long since anyone hugged me." Mr. Anthony also arrived, 85, a widower for 10 years, who had been living on sufferance in the house of a son who treated him like an old piece of furniture. He couldn't make noise, couldn't have visitors, couldn't even watch television at a volume he could hear. When Eleanor showed him the common room and said he could watch whatever he wanted, at whatever volume he needed, the old man cried with emotion. Then came Mrs. Marlene, Mr. Francisco, and Mrs. Judith. each with their own story of pain, abandonment, and loneliness, and each was received not as a charity case, but as someone who deserved to be there, who deserved dignity, who deserved love. The staff was small, but dedicated. 2 nurses, Rachel and Fernanda, both specializing in geriatrics, a cook, Mrs. Socorro, who cooked as if she were making food for her own family, and 2 caregivers, Mark and Julia, young but extremely dedicated, all trained, all handpicked by Nancy and Brian. No mistreatment, no neglect. Each resident would have regular medical care, activities, companionship. They would have a life. Eleanor visited the Otis house every day. Sometimes she would spend the whole afternoon there, talking with the residents, listening to their stories, sharing her own. An affectionate routine was established. In the morning, a communal breakfast in the kitchen with fresh biscuits and strong coffee. Afterward, everyone did as they pleased. Some watched television, others played dominoes or checkers. Some preferred to read or just sit in the yard watching the birds. Mrs. Geraldine, on days when her memory was good, gave English lessons to Julia, who was taking a course to become a nursing assistant and needed to improve her writing. Mr. Raymond, who had been a carpenter his whole life, helped Mark fix small things that broke. Mr. Anthony, who had a beautiful voice, sang old songs that moved everyone. Gradually, that group of strangers, united by the pain of abandonment, became a family. They celebrated birthdays together, with cake and songs. They watched the soaps together, commenting on each episode, making theories about what would happen next. On Sundays, when Joshua brought Leo to visit Eleanor, they all ended up at the Otis house. The boy loved the grandpas and grandmas, as he called each one. He ran from one to another asking for stories, showing them drawings he had made at school. And those seniors, who had been discarded by their own families, blossomed with the child's attention. Mr. Raymond made wooden toys for Leo. Mrs. Geraldine taught him old nursery rhymes. Mr. Anthony sang folk songs. It was beautiful to see. It was healing for everyone involved. But Eleanor didn't stop there. With the money that was still left, and there was a lot, she realized her second dream, a transitional home for vulnerable people. It wouldn't just be a place to sleep and eat. It would be a place of reconstruction, with psychological support, vocational courses, help with getting documents, and job placement assistance. She bought a smaller house near Nancy's boarding house and transformed it into the renewal shelter. It had 5 shared rooms, each with a capacity for 3 people, a large common area, a community kitchen, 2 bathrooms, and an outdoor area with tables and chairs. She hired a psychologist, Dr. Evans, who deeply believed in the human capacity for recovery, a social worker, Robert, who knew all the support networks in the region, and 3 educators who would teach vocational skills. The renewal shelter had clear rules. It was not a permanent shelter. It was a transitional place where people would stay for a maximum of 6 months while they got back on their feet. During that time, they would participate in therapy, courses, workshops. They would learn skills, recover documents, build resumes. And when they left, they would leave with real tools to start over. The first group arrived in December, 2 weeks after the inauguration. There were 12 people, men and women of various ages, each with their own story of falling, of loss, of giving up, and each with a spark, however small, of wanting to try again. There was Michael, 38, who had lost his construction job after an accident and ended up on the street. There was Maria, 45, who had fled an abusive relationship and had nowhere to go. There was John, 23, who had aged out of the foster care system at 18 and had never been able to get established. There was Rose, 52, who had developed severe depression after losing her daughter and ended up losing everything else. Eleanor made a point of being there to welcome each one. She looked each person in the eye and said the same thing. You are not your past. You are not your falls. You are your ability to get back up. And here, we are going to help you get back up. The first few days were always difficult. People arrived suspicious, hurt, afraid to believe that this was real. But slowly, with the structured routine, with constant support, with small daily victories, they began to open up, to believe, to try. Michael took an electrician course and within 3 months got a job with a maintenance company. Maria, with intense psychological support, regained her self-esteem, took a course to become a caregiver for the elderly, and went to work at the Otis house itself. John discovered a talent for cooking, took a course as a kitchen assistant and got a job in a restaurant. Rose took longer. The pain of her loss was too deep. But with therapy, with the right medication, with the support of the group, she slowly began to live again. There was a special ceremony every time someone left the renewal shelter to start a new life. Everyone would gather. The person would share their journey and receive hugs and well wishes. Eleanor always made sure to give each one a small amount of money, enough to pay the first month's rent and get organized, and a card with her phone number with the message, "If you need anything, call always." News of Eleanor's project spread throughout the region. Local newspapers ran stories. The regional TV stations sent a crew. Eleanor gave interviews, always humble, always directing the focus not on herself, but on the people being helped. She wanted the world to know that the elderly are not burdens, that homeless people are not invisible, that every human being deserves a chance. It was during one of these interviews that Katie saw her former mother-in-law on television. She was living in a rented studio apartment, bitter, furious, facing legal charges but out on bail. She saw the woman she had tried to destroy, now rich, famous, admired, and she felt a consuming rage. It wasn't fair, it couldn't be this way. She deserved a part of that money, she was entitled to it. In Katie's distorted mind, a plan began to form. If she couldn't get it through the law, she would get it through emotion, through blackmail. She knew that Joshua was Eleanor's weak spot, and she knew that a child was always a powerful asset. 3 months after the inauguration of the Otis house, on a rainy February afternoon, Katie showed up at Nancy's boarding house. She looked different, thinner, with deep dark circles under her eyes, her hair unkempt. And she was carrying a baby in her arms, a baby of just a few months. Nancy answered the door and almost slammed it in the woman's face, but Katie was quick. "I need to talk to Eleanor. It's urgent. It's about this child." Nancy, suspicious, called Eleanor. The old woman came to the living room, and when she saw her former daughter-in-law with a baby in her arms, she felt a chill run down her spine. "Eleanor?" Katie said, with a voice that tried to sound sweet, but came out false. "This is Sophia, Joshua's daughter. Your granddaughter." The floor seemed to open up under the wheelchair. Joshua's daughter. He hadn't mentioned anything. He hadn't said Katie was pregnant when they separated. Or was she really his? Katie saw the confusion on her former mother-in-law's face and seized the opportunity. "She's his. I found out I was pregnant after he left me. Now I'm alone with no money, with a child to raise, and you swimming in millions, while your own granddaughter is in need." Eleanor looked at the baby. It was a little girl with big eyes and chubby cheeks. She looked healthy, well cared for. But something didn't add up. Katie had never mentioned a pregnancy, not in the months before the divorce, not during the proceedings. Why would she hide something like that? "Katie," Eleanor said calmly, "if this child is really my granddaughter, I will help. But first we need to do a test, a DNA test to be sure." Katie turned pale. She tried to argue, to say it was absurd, that it was obvious the child was Joshua's, that she was only asking for what was fair. But Eleanor was firm. No test, no talk. Brian had already been called and was on his way. The young lawyer arrived quickly, bringing with him documents and information that cornered Katie. He asked a few questions about the pregnancy. When had Katie said she found out? What month was the baby born? Where was the birth certificate? Which hospital had provided the prenatal care? Katie's answers were evasive, contradictory. Brian asked to see the certificate. Katie said it was at home, that she would bring it later. But the lawyer insisted. He called the hospital where Katie claimed to have given birth. There was no record of her delivery there. He called the regional clerk's office. No certificate in the name of Sophia, daughter of Joshua Miller or Katie. The truth began to unravel like a ball of yarn. Pressured, cornered, with no way out, Katie finally admitted it. The child was not Joshua's. She was from a relationship she'd had after the divorce. A man who had disappeared when he found out about the pregnancy. She was desperate, penniless, and had thought she could use the child to get a piece of Eleanor's fortune. The coldness of the plan shocked everyone. Using an innocent baby as bait to extort money, how could someone sink so low? Nancy was furious, wanting to throw Katie out immediately. Brian talked about adding more charges to the lawsuit, but Eleanor raised her hand, asking for silence. She looked at Katie, and she saw not just the cruel woman who had left her to die on a deserted road, but a person who was deeply lost, destroyed by her own greed, her own mistakes, her own inability to love without self-interest. "Katie, you need help," she said, with a compassion that surprised even herself. "Not financial help, real help, psychological, spiritual. You're so consumed by anger and envy that you don't even realize what you're doing. You're using your own daughter as a tool for manipulation. Don't you see how absurd that is?" Katie laughed, a bitter, broken laugh. "Are you going to preach to me now? Pretend you're a saint? That you're better than me?" "I'm no saint," Eleanor replied firmly. "I'm just someone who learned that life is too short to be wasted on hatred, and that no child deserves to pay for the mistakes of adults. You have a daughter now, Katie, a child who needs you, who needs a present, loving, healthy mother. Don't ruin this little girl's life the way you've ruined your own." She held out an envelope. Inside was money, not millions, but enough for Katie to rent a better apartment, buy things for the baby, and have a few months of peace to get organized. Along with the money was the card of Dr. Evans, the psychologist who worked at the renewal shelter, with a note, "1 year of free counseling." "This isn't for what you did to me," Eleanor said, her voice firm but gentle. "It's for this child. Every child deserves a chance, and you do too, if you truly want to change. But you have to want it. You have to choose to be different. No one can do that for you." Katie took the envelope, stunned. She had expected a confrontation, expected the police, expected punishment. But this inexplicable generosity in the face of so much malice. She couldn't process it. She looked at her daughter in her arms, at the envelope in her hand, at Eleanor in the wheelchair. And for the first time in a long time, she felt shame. Real shame. She left the boarding house without a word, carrying Sophia, the tears finally coming, washing away years of bitterness, of bad choices, of wrong paths. Could she change? She didn't know. But for the first time in a long time, a door was open. A chance. And maybe, just maybe, she would take it. Joshua was told about the episode when he arrived the following weekend. He was furious. He wanted to sue Katie, wanted to punish her with the full force of the law. How dare she use a child like that? But Eleanor calmed him down. "Let it go, son. She's already carrying the weight of her own choices. And we have better things to do than feed hatred. We need to focus on what matters, on our family, on our projects, on making a difference in the lives of those who need it." And they really did. The Otis house was flourishing. New seniors arrived, referred by hospitals, by social services, by social workers from other towns who had heard about the project. The initial capacity of 10 residents was expanded to 15. Eleanor bought the house next door, renovated it, and connected it to the first one. Now there was more space, more rooms, more possibilities. Each new resident brought a story of abandonment, of loneliness, of pain. Mr. Walter arrived at 83 after his children fought over his house and put him in a private nursing home where he was mistreated. Mrs. Connie was 78 and had been left at a hospital entrance by her niece who had taken her pension. Mr. Benedict, 90, had been living on the streets for 2 years after his family kicked him out to take his small house. And each one, absolutely each one, found at the Otis house not just shelter but a family. The residents became close, friends. They played dominoes together on hot afternoons, watched the soaps together every night, shared memories of their youth, of lost loves, of hard times, but also of happy moments. Eleanor made sure there were regular activities. She hired a physical therapist who came 3 times a week to do light exercises with the seniors. She brought in an arts and crafts teacher who taught crochet, embroidery, and painting. The works they produced were displayed in the living room, a source of pride. She organized monthly outings, taking the residents to see local sites, always with the support of the healthcare team. The renewal shelter was also thriving. Every month new people arrived, went through the 6-month program, and left transformed. Not all of them, to be honest. Some couldn't adapt, went back to the streets. Others relapsed. But many, the vast majority, truly changed their lives. There was the case of Adrienne, who arrived addicted to crack, physically and emotionally destroyed. With treatment at a partner clinic, intensive therapy, and a lot of support, she managed to get clean. She took a course to become an administrative assistant and now worked at a school. She came back to the shelter every week to talk to the new residents, share her story and give them hope. There was Renato, who arrived illiterate at 46, having never had the opportunity to study. At the shelter, he learned to read and write. He took a gardening course and now took care of the green spaces of a condominium with a formal contract and pride in his own work. There was Elizabeth, who ran away from home at 16, lived on the streets for 20 years, surviving by begging. At 52, she arrived at the shelter not believing she could change, but she did. She went to therapy, resolved old traumas, reconciled with her family. Today she lives with her sister, works as a cleaner, and finally has a dignified life. There were parties on the day each person left with their life reorganized, going to live alone or with family, starting over. Everyone gathered in the shelter's outdoor area. There was cake, soda, lots of hugs. The person would share their journey, talk about the fears they overcame, the dreams they built. And Eleanor made sure to be present, to hug each one, to say that she believed in them, that she had always believed. And she always gave each one, in addition to the starting money, a small plant, a seedling of a tree or flower, with the message, "Take care of it like you're taking care of yourself. Watch it grow, and remember that you are growing too." Nancy's boarding house became the center of everything. Eleanor lived there, but now in a larger ground-floor room fully adapted to her needs. It had its own bathroom with grab bars, a small living area, and a large window with a view of the yard. Nancy was more than a friend. She was a sister of the heart. They spent hours talking, planning new projects, dreaming of what more they could do. Wayne had opened his auto repair shop and was prospering, but he still had lunch at the boarding house every Sunday. He brought his girlfriend, Christine, a sweet young woman who worked as a teacher. They were talking about getting married next year. Matt had completed his logistics course, got a job at a large transportation company, but also visited religiously. He said the boarding house was his real home, that these people were his real family. Gus showed up whenever he passed through town with his new truck. He would park in front of the boarding house, get out with bags of fresh fruit, vegetables. He never accepted payment. He said it was his way of saying thank you, that no amount of money in the world could pay for what Eleanor had done for him. Not just the truck, but the dignity of knowing that a simple act of kindness was worth so much. And on Sundays, when Joshua arrived with Leo, the house filled with life. The boy was 7 now, talkative, curious, full of energy. He ran through the boarding house yard, played with the chickens Nancy raised, climbed trees under his father's watchful eye. Then they would all go together to the Otis house, where Leo was received like a prince by the grandpas and grandmas. Joshua's relationship with his mother, though still carrying scars, was genuinely healing. He actively participated in the projects, helped with bureaucratic issues, used his contacts to get donations and partners. He discovered in this work a purpose he had never had before. He was even thinking of quitting his job to dedicate himself full-time to his mother's social projects. Eleanor watched her son's transformation with emotion. She saw in him traces of the boy he had been, before the world hardened him. And although the pain of the abandonment would never be completely forgotten, it was slowly being enveloped by layers of forgiveness, of understanding, of rebuilt love. One night, late, Eleanor was alone in her room, looking at the silver brooch she always kept nearby. The same brooch she had worn on that terrible day she was abandoned. She thought about everything she had lived through, the difficult youth in the arid desert, the brief but happy marriage, the early widowhood, the solitary raising of her son, the stroke that took her legs, the cruel abandonment, the miraculous rescue, the discovery of the land, the unexpected fortune, the projects that changed so many lives. And she understood, with crystal clarity, that everything, absolutely everything, had a purpose. The pains had prepared her to understand the pain of others. The loneliness had taught her to value companionship. The abandonment had made her understand the importance of welcome. The unexpected wealth had given her the means to make a difference. Every piece of her life's puzzle fit perfectly to lead her to that moment. If I hadn't gone through all of that, she thought, I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't have created the Otis House. I wouldn't have founded the renewal shelter. I wouldn't have saved these lives. Maybe, just maybe, that abandonment on the road wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning of something much, much bigger than I could have ever imagined. A year and a half after the inauguration of the Otis House, at a birthday party for the project, Eleanor was surrounded by people. There were more than 100 guests, seniors she had rescued, people who had gone through the renewal shelter and started over, volunteers, staff, partners, friends, family. Joshua was there with Leo and his new girlfriend, a kind woman named Patricia, who worked as a nurse and was already helping with the projects. Nancy coordinated everything with her usual efficiency. Wayne and Christine helped with the barbecue. Matt was in charge of the music. Brian gave a speech about the importance of social projects and announced that he had secured a partnership with the city to expand the shelter. Someone asked Eleanor to speak. She hesitated. She had never liked the spotlight. But the crowd insisted. They applauded. They chanted her name. These were words that needed to be said. Nancy pushed the wheelchair to the front, where a small makeshift stage had been set up. Eleanor sat there before all those faces. She saw hope where there had once been despair. She saw life where there had once been surrender. She saw family where there had once been loneliness. And she began to speak, her voice firm despite the emotion that made her heart race. "I'm no one special," she began. "I'm just an old lady from the country who had a hard life, who went through bad things, who almost lost everything, including her own life. But I learned some important things on this journey. I learned that we are not defined by what happens to us, but by what we choose to do with what happens." She paused, looking at Gus. "I learned that kindness exists, even when it seems the world is nothing but cruelty, that there are still people willing to stop their truck, to extend a hand, to save a stranger who is dying on the side of the road." She looked at Nancy, at Wayne, at Matt. "I learned that family isn't just blood. It's who is by your side when you need them. It's who lifts you up when you fall. It's who believes in you when even you have given up. It's who opens the door of their house and their heart without asking for anything in return." She looked at the residents of the Otis House, at the people who had gone through the renewal shelter. "I learned that it's never too late to start over, that it doesn't matter how old you are, how many times you've fallen, how deep you've sunk. You can always get back up. You can always try one more time. You can always be better than you were yesterday." Her voice began to break, tears streaming down. "And I learned that suffering, no matter how terrible, can be transformed into purpose, that pain can become strength, that those who were abandoned can learn to welcome, that those who had nothing can give, that from a tragedy, hope can be born for many people." The audience was in absolute silence. Many were crying with her. Eleanor took a deep breath, wiped her tears, and continued. "I wanted to thank every single one of you who is here, those who saved me when I had nothing left, those who believed in my dreams when they were just the crazy ideas of a stubborn old woman, those who work every day on the projects, caring with love for each person who arrives needing help, those who donated, who helped, who were part of this story." She looked at Joshua, who was crying openly, holding Leo's hand. "And I thank my son, who made mistakes, who lost his way, but who had the courage to acknowledge it, to come back, to try again. That is also a new beginning, Joshua. That is also transformation, and I am proud of you." Joshua covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. Leo, not quite understanding, hugged his father. Patricia placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of support. Eleanor finished, her voice now firm and clear. "This house, this shelter, all of this is not mine. It belongs to all of us. It belongs to every person who was abandoned and found a family here. It belongs to every person who was on the street and found a path here. It belongs to everyone who believed that change is possible. My greatest happiness is not the money that came, but the love that multiplied, the lives that were transformed, the stories that were reborn, that is worth more than any fortune. The applause was deafening. People stood up, cried, hugged each other. It was a moment of pure celebration, of collective gratitude, of recognition that there, in that simple place in the heart of the country, something extraordinary was happening. When the party ended and everyone had gone home, when the lights were turned off and the silence returned, Eleanor was left alone on the porch of the Otis house. It was a clear night with stars visible in the unpolluted desert sky. The gentle breeze carried the smell of damp earth from the rain that had fallen earlier. She looked up at that infinity of twinkling lights and thought of her father Otis, her mother, her husband, all those who were already gone. "I hope you're proud," she murmured to the stars. "I hope you understand that I tried to do the best I could with what I was given. I took that piece of land you left that seemed worthless, and I turned it into life, into hope, into love." A shooting star crossed the sky, fast, luminous. Eleanor closed her eyes and made a wish. Not for herself, never for herself. She wished that the projects would continue even after she was gone, that other people would take up the banner, that other Otis houses would be born, that other renewal shelters would multiply, that no one ever again would be abandoned to die on a road, that no one would be discarded as if they had no value. When she opened her eyes, she felt a peace she had never felt before, a peace that came from the certainty that her life had meaning, that her pains were not in vain, that her suffering had borne fruit, that she mattered, that she had made a difference, that she had loved and been loved. At 74, when many would believe that life was already written, that the end was near, that there was no more time for great achievements, Eleanor Vance discovered that she was just at the beginning. Because real life, the life that truly matters, is not measured in years, it is measured in love, in connections, in lives touched, in differences made, in seeds planted that will continue to grow long after the hands that planted them are no longer here. And by that standard, Eleanor Vance had not just begun to live, but was living fully. Every day was a new opportunity to do good. Every person who arrived was a new chance to show that caring still exists. Every recovered smile, every wiped tear, every witnessed new beginning, all of it was a victory. All of it was life. The wind rustled the trees in the yard. Somewhere, a dog barked. Farther away, music played softly. Life went on, simple and extraordinary at the same time, and Eleanor, sitting there in her wheelchair under the starry sky of the desert that had seen her born, felt complete. She felt at peace. She felt, finally, at home.